Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for this kind invitation. Um, and thank you all for coming. It's a great honor to have magnificent crowd. Um, Today, at my lecture, I'll try to briefly talk about the challenges that traditional architects are facing in the Arab world. So I chose some projects to share the experience that I had with you, hoping that I can ignite some questions or at least some intrigue. I come from a part of the world which happens to have a heavy history on its shoulder. If one looks at the map of the world and looks at the center of this map, you'll immediately recognize a great ocean of sand that almost defines the Arab Islamic world. From this part of the world emerged great ancient civilizations like the Mesopotamians, like the ancient Egyptians. And from this part of the world came the great tradition of monotheism. So monotheism was born at this part of the world. And from an artistic point of view, the shift from an anthropomorphic or man-like image of the divine into an absolute, all-encompassing God that is abstract and beyond representation is a great leap in the creative art of the region and creates a great challenge to the artist in trying to express the divine in the most abstract way. I had the fortune to work in the Far East, in the Indian subcontinent, and in the UK briefly. But I'll try to focus on some of the projects that I did in the Arab world, given the time that I'm allowed to speak about. So when we talk about traditional architecture, mostly now traditional architecture is basically associated with form. It is first and foremost understood through its form. So when one sees an arch, a vault, a cross vault, or a dome, it is naturally associated with the traditional architecture. And it is very intriguing to understand that these elements are universal. They don't belong to any specific culture. No ancient civilization can claim the invention of the arch or the dome. It is the truly universal language of design. In elaborating on that point, one can immediately recognize that an arch indicates an entrance, a vault indicates a movement, a cross vault indicates a crossing of a movement, and a dome immediately signifies the transition from the horizontal plane into the vertical one, thus creating the sacred, the dome on top of the holies of holy or on top of the mihrab in the mosque becomes immediately a phonetic form. And once the congregation hears the recitation of the leading imam or leading priest, the holy word takes form under the dome because of its phonetic nature. It one of the best spaces, acoustically is the dome because of the natural resonance of the human voice underneath it. Now, structurally, an arch is an opening, a vault is a projection of the arch, and the dome is a rotation of the arch. So the arch, in terms of forces, transfers the load applied on it to its side all the way to the foundation. And the vault does the same. But the dome, so it works on two directions on the axis of X and Y. And that's why it's also one of the strongest forms found in nature and have ever been devised by human beings effortlessly. Of course, one would have to speak about the map or the formula that one would like to adhere to, or in better sense, the canon that guides traditional architecture. Here I try to summarize it in the most abstract way so it becomes a bit applicable everywhere. So the material and the master and the meaning are the three ingredients that creates this kind of art, whether it's architectural or pure art. From the physical reality comes the material, the first encounter between the master or the man and the canons that guides our being, the physical canons like gravity, wind, and so on. And from the material, from the physical reality, emerges the locally sourced material, just like stone, or naturally occurring material like stone, or locally sourced like bricks. So traditional architecture basically stands in the material level on the triad of nobility: stone, bricks, and wood, which also intriguingly naturally works in compression. So the master, once engaged with physical reality, the first and foremost action it takes place is the indigenous, the first manifestation of the relationship between man and nature, and the most primitive. And it starts developing all the way until it reaches the sacred, the most sophistication, architectural par excellence. In between the sacred and the indigenous happens the cityscape, the monumental, the vernacular, the bazaar, the public spaces, the public buildings, the palaces, the townhouses, and so on. Now, once you reach the sacred, it is the place where architecture aspires to something that is way beyond its physical reality, and it tries to represent that which is abstract. And in the stations of being, the first transition between the spiritual and the physical, there happens to be the mathematical, which is the geometrical. The use of geometry is the true language. As Ibrahim al-Kawni, the great Libyan philosopher, says, language X, which is truly universal. It is the visual representation of mathematics, or in better sense, giving mathematics form. So the language of geometry is the true language of design. But language of geometry is also abstract. It has to be utilized through the man of the place. So in that sense comes the role of the master. And the role of the master, and I say here master, that is the man who can build, that understands the local history, the local culture, the cycles of the nature in a particular place. So it is most preferably a man of a place, a man of culture. So if one wants to define traditional architecture, at least in my understanding, in my experience, I would say that anything that is built without stone, earth, or wood, naturally occurring or locally sourced, is not noble. These materials, if they are not used in their true structural capacity, that is structural masonry or load bearing, it is not traditional. A building that is built without the local mason, the local man that understand the locale, the history, the topography, a product of the place, is not traditional. A building that is not designed in a perpetuation of the architectural language of the place, which has been, for a place that has a rich history, the architectural language or architectural vocabulary that we find in historical buildings is the collective knowledge of thousands of years of problem solving manifest in architecture. So the true role of the architect in this particular sense, whether he is the man of the place or whether coming from outside, is to actually disappear, is becoming a vessel of traditional knowledge into contemporary buildings without having to enforce any style. So traditional architecture has no style. It doesn't operate upon style, and it's not subjugated to the whims of the architects. It's more or less the understanding of the canon, the collective canons that guides such a noble approach. I would like here to give an example of what I have just said. This is one of the famous palaces in Damascus. It's called Azam Palace. Here in this particular image, you can see everything that I have spoken about in the previous slide. You can see the local materials waving itself as a fabric in the walls. So lime and lava stone, creating the threads, because lava stone and limestone and sandstone are rich and abundant in Syria. The man of culture transformed this raw condition into a proper building materials in the load bearing in its true structural sense to create the space. The more equipped and the more culture and the more rich in history a place, you will find the more sophisticated use and understanding of this local material to be able to create the muqarnas, the detailed, intricate stonework. Because wood is also abundant in that particular place, in this great city, the man, the local craftsman, was able to understand local wood and transform it into an artistic canvas that speaks the language of the place. So one would look at this image, should immediately recognize its whereabout. This is the beauty of traditional architectures. From its physical existence, one can know where it is built. A man of knowledge can easily recognize this is in Tunisia, this is in Syria, this is in Yemen, and so on and so forth, as such as it is complying with the use of local materials and the employing of local vocabulary, local architectural vocabulary. I have been working in traditional research and practice for over 15 years now. My focus was load-bearing structures, and my research has always focused on the sacred, and more specifically the mosque, because the way I see it, especially in the Arab Islamic world, is that the mosque is the greatest, the grandest example of the capacity of the people of a certain city. Once all the crafts come together, just like the picture we saw, They come together in the most elegant and the most abstract way in the sacred. So, from my experience, I could not but say that the most interesting thing that I found in my practice is the scarcity and the lack of structural know-how and load-bearing knowledge among engineers, architects, and contractors. But the most severely challenging point was to find local stonemasons or local masons who can transform raw matter into a building block, and more specifically to resolve the roofing problem, to be able, because you can build a wall, but the most challenging aspect is to build the ceiling. I'm talking about building a ceiling without any reinforcement. It's unfortunately the invasion of modernism in our part of the world has devastated and destroyed cities that are ancient and new cities. And that's why these trades are disappearing. It's becoming more and more very rare to find. So I'll try to briefly, through the work that I'll be presenting, to introduce these challenges and introduce the way we try to resolve them. After working under the auspices of Abdul Wahid al-Wakil for years, I went back home to Syria. I took a tour. This is, of course, before the devastating events. I took a tour around the country, historical sites, ancient cities, old and new. And I realized that it's rich in building materials, but there is also the lost connection between the building materials or the raw condition and the end product to be able to transform abundance stone, for example, into a building. So during my tour, I was fortunate to come across a man from a humble background. He lives in a village next to Damascus, around 40 kilometers to the south of Damascus, and he wanted to build a house. So we immediately thought of the naturally abundant lava stone at the southern part of Syria to employ it as a building material. But because we couldn't find any trained masons who can resolve the ceiling problem, and not to mention the very tight budget that we had to improvise. And improvising here came by transforming local basalt into a building block that actually has some of the characters of the basalt in this building block. What's beautiful about this project is that the building block and the construction were made by the owners and his relative, because we couldn't afford a contractor. We had to do it ourselves. And we managed to build a house that is less than anything that could be said. All load bearing, local material, no contractor, made on site, made through the owners and his extended family, and tried to introduce a contemporary model to resolve the construction challenges that most low-income people in Syria face when it comes to building, because they had to go and take a loan and the bank wouldn't give them because they're financially incompetent. So this vicious cycle, we tried to resolve it by relying on ourselves. This project was actually my initiation into traditional architecture. It was my first project. It was completed in late 2010, just a little bit less than a year before the devastation events that took place in Syria, which also hindered any future projects following this attempt in Syria. Fortunately, I was later invited to design and build a mosque in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. Jeddah is the port city on the Red Sea, and it falls in the Hijaz region. Hijaz region in Saudi Arabia is where the two holy places of Mecca and Medina happens to be. And because it is the port, the ancient port of these two holy cities, you can imagine the amount of influx of people from all over the world coming for their Hajj ritual. They come, some stay, and most go back home. And because they stay, they bring in their building traditions, their building techniques. So the Hijazi architectural language is one of the richest in the Arab Islamic world because it is the true amalgamation and the melting pot of all the Islamic world manifested in one single style using the local material. So once we started the design, because Hijaz also celebrate one of the latest traditional influences in Hijaz was the Ottoman. And here we employed the architectural languages of the Ottoman because it was the most persistent and the most abundant before modern invasion took place, unfortunately, in this particular part of the world. So the challenge here was to build it out of brick after completing the design process, doing all the architectural, structural, mechanical, all the necessary drawings. The challenge was to convince the manufacturer and to convince the engineers is that it should be built with bricks. To be able to do that, I had to bring the only remaining brick producer and contractor in Saudi Arabia to actually come and agree to build it. And we had to sign a 10 years structural guarantee just to convince people to build it out of brick. Although for somebody who works in tradition, this seems almost natural to do so, especially because the form and the structure and the material becomes one. Brick, vaults, domes, load bearing. This is a natural system for anybody who's doing traditional architecture. But for the mainstream engineering that's taking over all over the Arab world, there's a huge resistance. They don't want to. They are maybe scared. They don't want to. Maybe they don't want to appear weak in terms of engineering because they only do what they do best, which is enforced concrete. But once, because of the support of the consultant here in this particular project, and because of my insistence in doing it in bricks, we managed to convince them to start, and we brought this only contractor available there to produce the bricks and to do the construction. And once the buildings start taking shape, once the walls and the ceilings took form, all the resistance that we had from all the engineering transformed into appreciation because they realized the effortlessness of doing such forms in natural materials and producing the material locally and in building it. We managed to do it way faster than conventional reinforced concrete. This is one of the biggest dome I have ever built, by the way. It's a 10 by 10 meter span, and it reaches a height of 24 meters. The end result, thankfully, was completed around 2013, and it is now open to the public. Following this project, I was invited by a remarkable gentleman to work on his summer retreat house in Taif, which is at the western corner of Saudi Arabia, but it's a mountainous area, around 2,300 meters above sea level. So it's an area that is known for its rich in granite and known for its nice weathers and fruit gardens. Because of the remoteness of the site, no contractor agreed to work on this project. Nobody wanted to come in. Although the client is very well connected, Nobody wanted to build with stone, and nobody wanted to take on this project. So I was left with the client with maybe 4 or 5 stonemasons that they were semi-skilled, I would say. They know how to build walls in the load-bearing system, but they don't know how to build any types of curved ceiling. But what's interesting about this project is that it was not only built by few masons, and the masons were developed and trained during construction. What's interesting and fascinating about this experience is that it was built without any construction documents. The client and I took the bold decision to design as we go. There was no preconception. So the construction and the design happens simultaneously. It felt like it was a harmonized yet improvised act of construction and design at the same time. And the end result seems okay for something that has not been designed. What happened there during construction is that the intent of the design took place through the architect and the client by drawing on land and using rope geometry to maintain the proportions. We mapped the plans on the site, and without anybody knowing how it would eventually look like when it ends. So it just grew out of the conditions, the harsh conditions, the limitations of the budget, the scarcity of skilled manpower, gave birth to this project. One remark I remember that actually summarizes 3 years of continuous work on this project was one who she said, approached from a distance, this project does not feel it was built. It rather feels it was grown out of nature. And I think this particular comment on this project by the many visiting dignitaries to the project, I think summarizes the whole experience, because what we had experienced during construction, actually people felt and touched once they visited the site. Because this project, because the huge nature of this project, it's actually 3 buildings, one for the client and 2 for his visiting dignitaries. It caught some attention. It was nominated for 2 international awards, and also caught the attention of one gentleman in Saudi Arabia as well, very highly educated man, that happens also to be deeply rooted and connected to his hometown. He comes from a small town called Baljurashi in the southern tip of Saudi Arabia, next to the borders of Yemen. So the area there is very rich in granite and sediment stone. The traditional architecture there uses sediment stone rather than granite, because granite is very difficult to work with. But with the grace of God and the team that I had worked and trained in the previous project, we managed to organize ourselves and venture into this new experience after the client's invitation. What I want to show in this picture is what you see is the boulders at the back of the immediate context of the land. So actually the land sits on stone boulders. In real estate values, this land is mostly abandoned. Nobody wants to work on, because nobody wants to exert the effort of taking out the stone. But for us, it was a huge advantage, because this is the building material that we used. From the immediate context, we managed, through our trained masons, to transform this very tough and rough stone into elegant, man-made, hand-carved stone pieces that gave us the walls, gave us this huge granite lintel and gave us the arching through the natural and local architectural vocabulary of the region. If one from the region, from that particular region, or any knowledgeable architect would look at this image, I would assume he would immediately identify its location, because this column that is heavily used in the architectural language of Al-Baha used to be done in wood. But what we managed to challenge ourselves is to reintroduce it in one piece with stone, with granite, which was a huge task for us, for everybody in the team. And because of the scarcity of wood that is actually can be used for construction in that particular region, we had to also improvise. So what we did is that we employed two types of wood. Saudi Arabia now is going through a huge transformation in terms of construction and so many other things. So they're getting rid of the old wooden posts that is pine wood that used to be used for electricity and telephone. So we went and bought these. They are also taking out the old wooden blanks for the old train rails and converting it into precast. So we had two great materials: pine, that gives us extreme distance and length, and bormatique, that gives us almost a compressive strength that very close to stone. They were all used in this construction, or I would say they were all repurposed and reused in the construction of this project to fulfill. Of course, this is not yet complete. We're planning to complete it by the end of this year. But also here, our intent was to have the project grow organically out of its context, just like a fruit tree that bears the soil and the mix of its own climate, its own soil, manifested and blossoming through the use of local architectural language and, of course, local material. I want to introduce to you my heroes, the people, those people, some of them. This is not the whole team, but I selected few that I felt that they are the most dedicated. All of them were semi-skilled, or some of them have never worked in load-bearing construction. Absolutely not. It was their first experience with us. So here, the lack of finding a local mason, which is the most natural, is filled in through the structural knowledge that any architect should have once approaching a traditional project, is to be able to empower the local, to transfer the knowledge, because now these people, these are my heroes. Whether they work with us or they work in their own villages or wherever God takes them to work, they still hold the knowledge deep down inside of them. They know now how to build with stone, build with bricks, how to resolve the vaulting ceiling, the problem. And this is the treasure that we part of the world, because local material has always been there. It's just in front of us. And the knowledge is widespread. It's not secrets. But the missing aspect is the trained manpower. At least in the projects that I have been engaged in, I always face that. And because I cannot find contractors who are trained to do that, I had to do it myself. I had to build myself. I built the whole project myself with the small team in Syria, and I taught myself how to build. So I can teach others, so I can resolve the lack of missing elements. and also to create a new breed of engineers, of masons, of carpenters. I am very proud of my carpenter because now he can resolve the wood problems without any nails. It's all jigsaw. And this is something that can help produce projects of quality, projects that the architects becomes an active agent rather than a leading man of the operation. At the end, I truly believe we don't need architects to change the world. No, I mean, the last 100 years that modernism took over has proved that modernism is completely failing in terms of cityscapes. It destroyed our ancient cities. What we truly need is engineers that can understand nature, the forces of nature, can understand the locale of every place they work in, can actually disappear in their work and become one with nature. Because at the end, what we hope to do is for our work to endure. And for anything to endure, it has to emulate the delicate balance and the delicate equilibrium found in nature. Thank you very much. Time is good.
Any questions?
I wanted to ask if the method that you pioneered in your Al Shafa project, can you hear?
Volume?
Okay. Is it? Okay. I wanted to ask if the method you pioneered in your Al Shafa project, where you improvised, how the project would progress in a kind of an exchange with the workers, the environment. Do you think this would also be applicable to sacred architecture?
No. No, because sacred architecture, I mean, traditional architecture in general follows archetypes. But in sacred architecture, well, in the traditional way, in the traditional sense, there was not really construction documents that we understand today in practice. It was basic drawings, and the strength of the building relies on the power of the mason, the capacity. What can he do with stone? How much is he involved with this building materials to bring its utmost capacity and transforming it into objective beauty? Being a house gave us this spontaneity, the freedom to be actually improvise. But for the sacred space, I would rather not. No, I would say no. It has to be properly done. And it has to employ the best people. In the map I was showing, from the indigenous to the sacred climbs this level of sophistication and climbs up the level of aspiration as well, and the ability to articulate the mosque or the temple in any tradition is the most sophisticated architectural statement. So in brief, I would rather not.
It's already working. Yes. It seems to me that the key for you has been to finding the right client, because you really need somebody that accompany you in this adventure. Isn't it?
Well, I have to say, informed clients are very rare to find. But I think if you have the right tools and you're flexible enough to work in different conditions with different challenges in different places, eventually client will come by, because from my experience, I sense that people are thirsty. They want to do that, but they don't know who can do that. Because yes, we are a growing group now, the traditional architecture, but we're still very tiny, very small against the mainstream architectural practice. So yes, clients are very important, informed clients are necessary, but even challenging low-income clients, because I work with the very low income and the very high income, and I never compromise the system. It's the same system. So traditional art can actually satisfy both social aspects. And the need is there. I think it is for us to promote and to spread the word, and people will come by.
You mentioned the problem of regulation. A lot of regulations, as you rightly point out, are based on an assumed form of construction, which is concrete construction or reinforced construction of one form or another. And this is a problem. It's a problem I've experienced, where I get engineers suggesting steel structure when there's perfectly satisfactory load-bearing structure. So it's not just the regulations, it's the engineers and the people behind the regulations. And it's quite difficult to enter into a project when you've got to tell your client that actually this won't conform to the regulations. I've got to do something else to do that. I wonder if you would comment on that.
Well, this is, I think the traditional architect today has to have the spirit of a fighter, because I think we fight for a just cause. But in terms of regulation, from my experience, there's nothing in the codes in the areas that I worked with, I mean, that actually says you can't do that. It's the engineers that faces the most challenge, because you immediately bring them out of their comfort zone. Even if you sign a structural statement or whatever you do, or bring masons or build mock-ups, eventually they will come by. I think the secret is in overcoming that is you have to be more knowledgeable than them. So if you know their game and you know your game, I think you can beat them. That's how I see it.
You mentioned your heroes or your artisans, no? Your team that you, is it your team and you are, so you do your job, your projects with them always? And you,
Not necessarily, no. It's not that I only work with them. It's that was not the purpose. It just circumstances put us together, and we worked on one project, and there's some knowledge transfer that took place in one project. I mean, the project in Syria, I built the team. The owner and his relative were ready to build another 2-3 houses, but politics and the devastation situation ended that. So it is, I think the architect should build a team wherever he goes. Even if he goes to one country and doing one project, the legacy is not the building. The legacy are the people, is to be able to replicate, because the team in Syria and the team in this project and this project can replicate that without me, without having to come back to me. This is the point, is that it becomes traditional architecture is never about the architect. It is always a story. It is always a social story. It's about the architecture, the making. The architect is just a mere agent, a vessel that transfer knowledge from one place to another, from one human being to another. So the team is spontaneous. We can build teams wherever we go.
Yeah, I mean, because we in Mallorca, we lose a lot of artisans because they are retiring and young people are not taking care of that. So that's what we found in Morocco in that case is that we found a lot of artisans and we still we were really we're really happy with that because we are trying to bring it back to Mallorca. No? We are losing a lot of details and a lot of people who knows how to work in some specific detail, no, in construction. So that's what I.
Well, you said that very interesting about you bringing them back here. I would argue that it is a bit counterintuitive to invite builders from neighboring countries to satisfy a structure or actually, it's more powerful to empower the local. And this is a huge task for the architect. So he has to know about stone, brick making, wood making, wood cutting, wood joinery, and so many other details to be able to guide the process. Because in Saudi Arabia is perhaps the only country that I worked in that they don't have any local masons. We looked a lot for a local carpenter, a local stone mason, a local brick maker. Yes, the company is, you might have a Saudi company, but the labor, the actual force, are not local. And I think this is a huge problem because without these force, it would never perpetuate itself. It will just, Abdul Wahid al-Wakil did a huge task in Saudi Arabia through the mosques that he did there. And he left us with a huge trained workforce. But because this work is so rare, they all went back to their countries. So that's why I realized it's so counterintuitive to import masons. Maybe to train for a bit, then go back. But the secret is to plant a seed wherever we go.
Hello.
Hi.
Congratulations for this wonderful presentation. It's
Thank you.
amazing your job. Just curious about how does your buildings deal with the infrastructures that, namely the mechanical infrastructures that some buildings probably will need to have to take care of ventilation, like the case of the mosque, where you have a lot of people in a moment.
You mean the
Right.
engineering?
Yes, not the structural part of the engineering, the other
MEP.
all
well-
the other ones, electricity, of course, not telecommunications.
You see, load-bearing structures are challenging when it comes to integrating modern MEP into them. But it is doable. The secret lies on the deep knowledge of the structural behavior. So you can transfer the loads away from ducts or chilled water system or the electricity. But I can, in the short answer is it can be easily done. There's no breakthrough. They can easily comply modern MEP with load-bearing structures. But it just requires deep structural knowledge in the mind of the designer, not the mind of the engineer. And that's why in the case of the mosque, I brought the engineer, but I had to do the work myself. I have to guarantee that it's structurally working with everything else. In the mosque, we use chilled water system, which with another dedicated machine for fresh air, which was not very challenging. But the challenges come when you used ducting system. But we had other projects where we resolved load-bearing walls integrated with ducts for AC. It can be done. Thank you.